Well, it's an honor, Daaji, to be here with you, traveling across space in this digital way, but aligning, I think, in so many ways with each other.
Yes, sir. Let me
So I had
ask
some
you.
questions about spiritual anatomy for you, and about your journey to be where this body called Daaji is right now. And I'm very excited about the many ways that there can be some resonance or joining of the different paths that we've been exploring. So in your book, what I was fascinated with was the wonderful juxtaposition of the two words, spiritual, which I'd love to know more about what that means for you, and anatomy, and the literal idea that we live in bodies and bodies have structures, which also have functions. But to put spiritual anatomy together is such a wonderful invitation to explore different facets of our lived reality, some we may not even think about. So when that phrase came to you, and in this beautiful book you've written by that name, Spiritual Anatomy, what was your experience of how that might be a helpful way of languaging something so deep as the many things you explore in the book?
Well, as a pharmacist by profession, I had some background with biology, physiology, neurology, and I often wondered, what is it that supports all these things? Body, our senses, they are supported by our nervous system. And the nervous system, each one manifests differently. The healthy nervous system of one person and healthy nervous system of another person, yet the consciousness differs. The level of perception and level of ignorance in both cases will be different. And we have infinite individuals, so there is infinity as far as these differences are concerned. And how do they manifest despite of similarity at a neurological level, anatomical level? So there is another layer behind what we call this physical system, nervous system. And that's where yoga comes into picture, and it says, we as neurological entities respond based on our energetic system. Now, this energetic system, like liver as an organ, or spleen as an organ, or lung as an organ, energetic or emotional vortexes are also present throughout the body. So this energetic manifestations at various levels in our body, starting with the Muladhara, what we call basal plexus. Then on, it keeps on moving to gastric plexus, cardiac plexus, and pharyngeal plexus, and what we call cranial or carnival. And it goes on and on and on. Often science wonders also, how does the soul enter the body? At what time, at what level of growth of embryo would the soul enter the body, and what is the organ through which it would enter? And the yogic science says it is somewhere from this crown, just if you measure these two earlobes and go up, and you go 4 and 6 fingers that side towards the occipital area. And well, generally some sannyasis, they keep the long ponytail, or in Jewish tradition, they keep a small cap, at the center of which I think that is the place from which the soul enters the system. And as it enters the system, based on its frequency, it moves through various plexuses. And that energy movement creates personality in us, how it settles within us. Now, if there is too much or too little, if it is unbalanced at a particular juncture, it will manifest either as an enhancing of personality or, I would say, regression in personality. For example, a person can be uh, very impulsive, can be, it's like a walking volcanoes. You know, some people are just, you say something and they get irritated and burst out with anger. So all these energy vortexes are manifested um, because of what they are actually from inside. And this, what they are from inside, are the manifestation of the conditioning from their environment, starting with parental in interventions, how parents think. They absorb all those things. Um, you must have also studied something like addiction, or if the parents are addicted to certain things, 80% chances are that the child will also end up being an addict. So the environment, the upbringing, not only of the present, but if you believe in the past, it can also influence our present energy vortexes. And we have somehow tried to mention how these energy vortexes can be refined, can be fine-tuned through yogic practices, especially through meditation. I have also described somehow in that book the process of death. And so just as there is a process of, how the soul enters, likewise there is a reversal, how the soul escapes or exits the body. So it's quite interesting how one energy vortex, once it is collapsed, it has its cascading effect and moves on until it escapes from the system. And it's a very stepwise process, and which most doctors and nurses would witness during their rounds in the hospital. What happens to a patient at a physiological level when soul is withdrawing? And this philosophy actually juxtaposes itself, that how certain physiological functions, emotional expressions, they coincide with what they see in patient's behavior at the moment of death. I find it very illuminating that how these energy vortexes are placed in our system. That's what I call it anatomy. And since they have all something to do with energy, I call it spiritual anatomy.
That's fantastic. You know, the background you have in pharmacology, in really look at how molecules impact the functioning of that anatomy, and
Yes.
the interest you have in the soul, which I want to ask you to clarify what you mean when you use that word. I had a beautiful period of time when I was teaching with a colleague named John O'Donohue, who was an Irish
Oh,
Catholic poet and a philosopher and a mystic, and he was also a Catholic priest, former Catholic priest. So when John and I used to teach together, he would use the word soul, and it has a certain meaning in the Catholic tradition. So you mentioned the word soul as it enters the body, and there's a lot to say. I can say from the conversation with John, but Daaji, when you use the word soul, how would you help describe what that word means for you versus a word like mind, or you use the word personality, or some people use the word psyche, and now you're using the word spirit. So these are all important words. So just for anyone listening to our conversation together, for you, what does soul particularly mean? But then how does it relate specifically to spirit and spiritual?
Let me share a little story. Something my father would share with me when I was very young. So, boy, have you seen mother delivering a child? I said, no. Then he starts, when baby is to be delivered and baby first appears, begins to cry. And baby does not cry, doctors or nurses will make sure the baby begins to cry. They tilt the body and tap in the back to stimulate the heart and breathing. And even then, baby does not cry. And the mother cries and the whole family cries because something that gives life did not come together. And he said that that entity is with us. It's within us since that moment, and it will continue to be with us until the last breath. That entity we may call soul or jiva, or we may call it life force. It really does not matter how you have the nomenclature for that life force that dwells in all of us. So names generally do not matter, but now when it comes to um, spirit and the soul, we often use them synonymously. But spirit has a wider range of, I think, understanding, wider meanings to it. Sometimes we say, why don't you have great spirit? Why don't you have joyful spirit? So spirit they often use as a mood also, that I'm in a great spirit means I'm in a great mood. And that great spirit or great mood can be only when you have truly centered within yourself. But we loosely use such terms. Oh, I'm so spiritual today. Being spiritual means you have identified yourself with the source, with the life force that's within you. And that's what I mean. When they say jiva, Jeeva, jiva in Eastern way of philosophy, it differs a little bit. That the soul, it means soul can be within the body and you're alive. And soul also can exist after it escaped from the system. But when we say jiva, it only means that while the soul is embodied, while it remains incarnated, then they call it, it is just to differentiate that soul is now alive and soul that has left. In some African tradition, in fact, they call the departed soul as the spirit of the forefathers or the elders. In many traditions, they're different. They have their specific meaning to it.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. In hearing you speak, Daaji, I can't help but bring in the background we both have in science. That for me as a scientist, I found also practicing as a psychotherapist that the psychotherapy I was doing, a healing relationship, the therapy of people and their psyche, that when you looked to the Webster's dictionary definition of psyche, it makes it a synonym for the soul, the intellect, the spirit, and mind. And even though in the broad field of psychotherapy there is no definition of mind, what that journey as a psychotherapist became for me was to say, wow, when people would use the word soul in the privacy of their therapy, and I would feel from them this sense that there was something emerging in not just their bodies, which I want to ask you about the chakras and the anatomy of that, but also in their relationships, then it became really intriguing from a scientific point of view. If the soul, as the Jiwa term says, it has an embodied manifestation, but you're mentioning that it can also have a manifestation outside the body. So in the field of cognitive science, there's a parallel to that, which says that information processing can be enacted, it can be embodied. So those are the embodied aspects of it that has a physical presence, but it's also extended beyond the boundaries of the skin of the body. So it's extended and it's embedded in our relational communication. So when I saw that years ago, I thought, if these mathematically oriented cognitive scientists are saying information processing is not just inside the body, and if we looked at, let's say, the philosopher Teilhard de Chardin, who said there's a noosphere, an atmosphere of information that noo refers to from Greek, then if there's something about the soul that had to do with information, what would it be? So I went on a long journey, and it has an amazing parallel with everything you're saying, which is from a scientific point of view. If you say, how could the essence of something, whatever we call it, mind, psyche, soul, if it could be both embodied and relational, what is its essence that might, from a scientific point of view, be both within and between? And the only thing that seemed to make sense was energy flow. That energy flow was not limited by the skull, so it certainly was not just up in the head, it's the whole body. But then the skin is not an impermeable boundary, a barrier that blocks energy flow. So energy flow is also happening between us right now. So then the journey became years ago, 30 plus years ago, to say, what do we know about energy? And could it be something about it that is giving rise to the feeling essence of the soul, both embodied and relational? And what came from that journey is something I want to ask you next, was the idea that health seemed to come when there was a process of flowing between one bank of a river that was chaos, the other bank was rigidity. And I went on this urgent search. Is there an area of science that says you've got this flow that goes between, almost like a river, the bank of chaos, the bank of rigidity, where the central flow has this harmony to it. It has this wholeness to it. It has a flexibility and adaptability. It's coherent, it's energized, it's stable. And I found it in a mathematics book in this very room here years ago, early 90s. And it was discovered in the 1980s. And it was people studying systems that had a certain set of characteristics that allowed them to be called complex systems. They were open to influences from outside themselves, number one. They were capable of being chaotic, number two. And they were what's called nonlinear, meaning a small input at time one would lead to a very difficult, if not impossible, to predict outcome. That's nonlinear. A large outcome compared to a small little change at time one. So I felt like human beings were complex systems. And the mathematics of complex systems said that, number one, they have something called emergent properties. That is, you take the elements together and the interaction of the elements gives rise to something larger than the individual elements, a kind of synergy. And this would be an example of wetness. No single water molecule is wet. You have a bunch of water molecules together, their interaction creates the property of wetness. So then I was reading further, and it said complex systems have a natural way they regulate themselves by something called self-organization, and this just was a wild moment. It said, which allows the system to optimally self-organize with harmony. But if you block the essentials of self-organization, it goes to chaos or rigidity. So I went, oh my, this is amazing. And the process that creates optimal self-organization is a fascinating one, where you allow elements of the system to be different or differentiated. And on the other hand, you allow them to be linked. And in those connections, the linkages, you don't lose the differentiation. There was no name for it, so I named it integration. So integration is what creates harmony, like a choir where the different singers can sing at different levels, but they create the harmonious togetherness without losing their differentiation. So that led to a proposal that could the soul, could the psyche, could the spirit, could the mind be an emergent aspect of energy flow that if we dissect it, you don't find it in any particular constituent, no particular part, but it emerges in a synergy from the whole. So when you say it enters into the body, yes, energy flow has a certain set of patterns that would then literally be the origin of our subjective experience, our perspective, our agency, all these things that we get a sense of the self, of the mind, of the soul. And then as we go through life, how we can create integration from the perspective that emerged from this view is what creates health. But you use a word spiritual health. And I'm wondering if any of this discussion of energy, complex systems, and emergence with self-organization, does that connect with what your journey has led you to explore, for example, the 16 chakras and how their linkage and differentiation, when I was reading your book, seems to be, if I'm not over reading integration into it, how you integrate the bodily system and that creates some well-being. But can you say something about spiritual health and the chakras and how it might relate, or maybe it doesn't, to these ideas from mathematics about complex systems?
You have touched so many topics within the last few minutes. One starting with consciousness, cosmic energy, cosmic consciousness represented that way. How the complex systems interact and remains integrated. How do they remain integrated? I think that's a fundamental question, and how they don't go into chaos, or how they go into chaos in certain cases. Right. Now, though human nature, when we talk of human nature, we have been gifted with free will. And how, depending upon how we use the free will, we create complexities or simplicities in our life. For example, when we are talking, and there are viewers who are listening and seeing what we are discussing, some will say, oh, I like that. Some will say, I don't like that. And some will just say, okay, let's see what comes up next. They have no reaction to it. Now, when you like something, what happens there? Or when you say, I don't like it. Okay. In the worldly terms, let's say you are in a flight and you say, oh, she is good. She's a great air hostess. She's beautiful. You like her. There is a passenger coming with lots of bags and two children crying hell out, and then say, okay, what do I do? I just can't stand their cry. I dislike it. You're watching a TV and you might, oh, he's gorgeous or he's wonderful. The sensual desire creeps in. Or you see some yacht or some beautiful house and say, oh, I wish I had that too. So in general, our likes and dislikes are in two categories, sensual and worldly objects. Sensual responses from within us, that response to outside, they're heavier than the desire to have a TV, for example, or Where am I going to pay my rent? How will I pay my next month's rent? This anxiety, the worldly worries about my survival. But whenever there is a sensual pressure or liking for some at a sensuous level, that seeks immediate satisfaction and it becomes very heavy. So it settles down at the lowest part around our chest area, or perhaps just two fingers above the last rib. And just above that, the worldly worries will settle there. And we have given the nomenclatures with all those things. Now, if this chakras remains overburdened by these so-called deposits of likes and dislikes, if it remains continually hammering you, I have to have that, I have to have that, what it creates as a ripple effect, it affects the next chakra, which is about 3 to 4 fingers below the right nipple. And there one experiences immense or intense restlessness. You can feel the vibrations there or some uh, circular movement around there if you are watchful. And then if this restlessness remains for a longer time, it can turn into an anger. How I'm not eligible for that fulfillment. What, why don't I deserve this? Everybody has it and I don't have it. So that anger or the angst settles, those vibrations settles almost 3 to 4 finger above the left nipple. And when you remain angry for a long enough period, it affects the next chakra, which is a mirror image of it on the right side. And that makes you lose hope somehow. You become fearful about life itself. Anger results in fear. And when this fear remains long enough, there is another chakra, this pharyngeal plexus. You draw between this point and this point and draw a line here. That's a pharyngeal chakra. And when you're confused, you start kind of hallucinating things because of that fear, that this chakra gets affected. And often people feel choked. They feel heavy here when they are not able to make decisions. So you see how simple likes and dislikes can have a ripple effect if not cleared up or clarified or we got to have some level of intervention before it settles and affect the higher chakras. And it goes on and on and on and on with its ripple effect until our overall consciousness becomes opaque. And that's what I call it, complexity is created in the field of consciousness. And that's why one is not able to perceive things as one would like to perceive, because now you are conditioned. This opaqueness is conditioning us. Okay. This conditioning can be understood if I give a small example of a baby elephant who is being trained to work in a circus. They chain the 4 legs with the iron chain and condition it for a long time. And then even when you tie it up with a small rope on a plastic chair in a circus ground, it will not move. Though that little elephant has the capacity to just throw the chair and bring down the entire tent. So this is how conditioning happens even with human beings also. See, the Dr. Ivan Pavlov's experiment is very famous, that we can have conditioning, specific conditioning based on how we are treated, based on how we undergo our life cycles. So conditioning is the main problem. For example, I was once watching an experiment I think it was by a mindfulness scientist from Harvard. I don't recollect the name of the experiment. But various religious people were there, and they were all kept in their functional MRI, and they were shown a video of how a person of a different religion or of the same religion were being tortured. And the reflection of, let's say, if you're a Muslim and a Jewish person is being tortured on that video, his MRI will be different from when he watches a Muslim person watching a Muslim terrorist victim. So this shows how your individual conditioning can affect how you respond with feelings. So spirituality, and especially in the spiritual anatomy, I have tried to describe how each chakra carries a particular emotion. You know, in 16th or 17th century, um, doctors used to call cancer as in women cancer, breast cancer was known as nun's disease because
Mm.
of that suppressed emotions and that unnatural lifestyle, or maybe because they are so committed to the religion, so they abandon things which other people will do, but still there would be some remnants of feelings that, oh, how come we are not having romance? And they suppress their feelings so much. And because of that, certain chakras, they get embedded, overloaded with emotions, and that cancer is the result. And often the left breast would have the cancer, not the right breast.
Mm.
Because as I was sharing with you before, that the sensual tendencies are first deposited just about 4 fingers below and 2 fingers that side, above the left rib. And the anger, the irritation is also on this side. So both, they come together, the anger and the dissatisfaction of who you are.
Mm.
And so that creates these triggers, and it creates certain stress hormones or neurotransmitters, and this is how we view our destiny as far as diseases are concerned.
Well, so when you think of spiritual health, um, how do you kind of summarize that if someone says, for example, in the United States of America, some people might suggest that the loneliness that's there in this country, the intense amount of human suffering in many ways, of racism, marginalization, polarization, but even from a physiological point of view, people just having all these autoimmune problems that are going on, and psychologically, the tendency for addiction and anxiety, depression, isolation, and even suicide attempts and completed suicide. We have a lot of mental suffering, and people would say we have a world of incredible pain. In the book I wrote, Intra-Connected, I try to address what the causes of that may be and also solutions we might come up with. But in thinking about the phrase spiritual health, I think it would be reasonable to say that in the United States, there is a deficit of spiritual health that is leading to mental suffering in all these ways. And I wonder how you would summarize then for the world, and we can begin with the United States, but in many countries of modern cultural view of separation, what is spiritual health and what are the pathways people can take either individually or as families or as communities to create more spiritual health?
Well, I put it this way. Every living being craves for happiness. When it is not met, it manifests with various diseases, mental diseases especially. Though you may be surrounded by loving family members, still you will feel lonely in a large family too. Being alone and feeling lonely is natural,
Mm-hmm.
but having a large family and yet feel lonely is disastrous. That has to be attended even more carefully. As I was saying, everyone, every life form seeks happiness, some comfort, some convenience. Can I enjoy happiness despite of having everything if I'm restless for whatever reason? Restlessness is not going to give birth to happiness. That means I have to be in a state of harmony within and without. How can I remain in harmony without peace at a mental level, some level of calmness? And how can I have that without contemplative mind? And how is contemplative mind possible without having a focused mind? And how can you have a focused mind without brain gym, we call meditation? So now you can connect the dots. You have to give them a purpose why one should focus the mind on a correct object. Even if your object of meditation is basketball or cycling, it really doesn't matter. Give them a purpose. Do this completely and slowly move from grosser to subtle. And when one remains focused on the subtle, the source of all, then we become very centered within ourselves. And it is this centering awareness that brings immense peace, unparalleled, because of this meditation, you see. While I was here a few years back, we conducted experiment at Drexel in 2003. We had about 20 students who participated in meditation, and each one was given a specific meditation, set practice, that you practice type A meditation. Other students were given type 2 meditation or B meditation, type C meditation. And then they were asked that when you meditate, meditate for 1 week and write your experience. And then they interchange for next week, the different methods. And they would practice, those methods and they write the experience. This would go on for about 6 to 8 weeks, I think. And lastly, I would say meditate with this heartfulness way of meditation, focusing on the heart. And they say it was very good, lot better than the other systems meditation we had shared. But then when we gave this same meditation method to meditate on the heart, but with pranahuti, it's a kind of, I would say, loosely, I would call it as energy transmission. A trainer who makes a will that let my spiritual state be transferred to this person, let him experience the peace I am enjoying, let him also enjoy. Right? So, and that was even better. They say this meditation with yogic transmission is the best one so far. And we have been sharing these methods to everyone, whoever is interested. And we have this app also that you don't have to go to India for being, taught this way of meditation. And then I would love to say, and with pride, that whoever meditates with this method, everyone, I would say, without exception, say, yes, this is the best thing that has happened to them. Not only because of the efficacy of the practice, but also because there is no dollar attached to it. So it's a volunteer attitude our trainers have. We have roughly
Hmm.
about 16,000 plus volunteers. For example, when you use this app tonight at 2 o'clock in the morning, for whatever reason, you woke up very early in California and say, I want to meditate at 2 in the morning, and you don't find a trainer in your city. So you just use that app, and someone who is awake in Tokyo or in Shanghai will connect with you and say, okay, Dan, I'm awake. You can meditate. And they would sit there and you sit in California, and you'll be able to feel that resonance of energy. You will feel the difference immediately. And that's a
Yeah,
guaranteed thing.
that's
So
beautiful.
this is how thing little by
Yeah,
little we can bring about a change. I think one heart at a time.
yeah,
Um, there is no magic wand that we can spread on United States and say, oh, let this mental disease go away. It has to be
yeah.
one heart at a time, I think.
Well, it's beautiful. It's such a profound cornerstone uh, that you're presenting two um, principles. I think are so beautifully articulated by what you're saying, Daji. One is that focusing attention and strengthening attention so that awareness becomes filled with this subtle energy flow patterns. And you mentioned the word source, so I want to ask you a question about that in a moment. And the other is that when it's relational, it expands beyond the individual. We have a word in I work in this field called interpersonal neurobiology, and we have a word MWE, MWE, so that you do the inner work of reflection, but you have a relational self also, the we. But in becoming part of a we, you don't lose the me. And it sounds like in that call I would make to Shanghai, there would be this experience where I'm joining with someone there at 2 in the morning, and then I'm actually going deeply into my inner reflection while it's also relational. So that might parallel the Mui view. In our practice, since we see integration as the foundation of well-being, the question came up in my own therapy practice: could I help my patients integrate consciousness? And what that required was asking the question, what is consciousness? And then seeing, could you differentiate its elements and then link them? Much like you might do, for example, in heartfulness meditation, of realizing there is literally a heart in your body, and that can be differentiated but linked to this larger sense of connection. So in the practice, the way we do it is, and also we have this opportunity where it's just available to everyone to do, we have a center of a wheel, which represents awareness, the knowing of awareness, that knowing aspect of consciousness. And the knowing is distinguished visually from a rim, which has all the things that can be known, like, for example, what you hear or see or smell, or the feeling of your heart or your breathing inside the body, or even your thoughts or beliefs. Like, for example, that issue of someone being from one religion or another, the beliefs you have about who's in the in group, or even your relational sense. So these are all in the rim, and you have a singular spoke, and you move the spoke around, including focusing on the heart. Well, what was fascinating about it was people started reducing their anxiety, their depression, dealing with trauma issues, even facing death, started to transform. But the amazing thing here for our discussion, when they would bend the spoke around into the hub itself and just rest in pure awareness, they started saying things like, it was timeless, it was empty but full, it had a feeling of the infinite, of course, the eternal, it had joy, it had love, it had connection, calm, being at home. Uh, and I did this with 50,000 individuals in person over the years. For those that took a microphone, we recorded the results. And we'll see if the results were similar for what the heartfulness meditation provides. But in this journey, what people started feeling was that that hub of the wheel, pure awareness, became a kind of source for them, a resource where they could go again and again to the source. And I, at the same time, when this was all coming out as data, was spending time with physicists who were the experts in the scientific realm of energy. So I'd say, well, what is energy? What is energy? And they would say, well, energy is the movement from possibility to actuality. So I mapped out the wheel of awareness results on what the physicists were saying energy flow meant, possibility to actuality. And when they say possibility, what they mean is a mathematical space called the quantum vacuum, which is what Arthur Zions, the emeritus quantum physics professor from Amherst, calls the sea of potential. It's the generator of diversity. All potentialities rest there. And when they flow from there, they go up into probabilities and then actualities, like a thought or a belief or a feeling in your body, for example, would be an actuality. But it emerges from this space of possibility. So when I asked the physicists, what would the qualities be in this realm of the sea of potential, this quantum vacuum? What they started to talk about was the difference between the macro state view that Newton talked about, these large bodies we're in, like the body or an apple falling from a tree or planets. And they have qualities of noun-like entities that are separate from each other. And they move in something called the arrow of time, a directionality of change that, because of something called the second law of thermodynamics, they're always moving to falling apart. And that gives us a feeling of time. But at the quantum level, quantum microstate level of reality, there is no time variable. Everything is there, a verb-like process that is massively connected across the Newtonian view of time and space separation. So when I look back at the 50,000 person survey of the Wheel of Awareness, the qualities, the feeling, the characteristics in the hub of knowing, the hub of awareness, met the criteria for the quantum realm. And so I started writing with my concern about what my science colleagues would say about it, and they didn't really like it too much. But the scientific view was pointing in the direction that awareness itself comes from the source of possibility, which is this sea of potential. In this graph, we call it the plane of possibility. And from that moment forward, which is many years ago now, indigenous teachings, contemplative teachings, and I'll ask you about your teachings in heartfulness and the spiritual anatomy perspective, if that view of the origin of consciousness being this sea of potential as a source for all sorts of things, including the feeling that love is the most common term people use for what they feel in that hub. And it's almost as if love is the fabric of the universe. And we forget that. And when we remember it, back and back and back, bring to mind. When we bring that to mind, we then become aware of the subtle source of all, which is this love. And it seems to be the origin of even being aware.
Well, I completely agree with you, what you have just shared with me. It's a very fascinating studies you have undertaken. Consciousness to me, simply defined, is degree of awareness. By that, it also means degree of unawareness, but that is half definition. Even suppose I perceive something, that something is wrong with my wife's health. She has a headache and she is not able to function properly. She can't do anything whatsoever. I become aware What next? Am I going to do something appropriate, respond with a proper measure? So consciousness, evolved consciousness is not just a measure of awareness, but also responding and making a potential of that moment possible. So we are, I think, in a sync kind of. To me also, it means just as children they love to play with toys. When you become teenager, you are busy with so many fancy things and romance take over. And then in adult life, we have our own life where we are passionate not only about making money, but that very profession becomes your passion then. See? So then the money making becomes a side intention. You are addicted to your profession then, see. Money becomes secondary, which was primary in the beginning. Now, these are all toys. Toys, I can understand children playing toys for entertainment, but teenager busy with romance, it's also like a toy to them. Adults, toys, playing with finance. Later on, playing with your esteem, your aesthetic life, etc. And that makes you so happy about it. Consciousness also, when you play around with your consciousness and various levels of consciousness, they give you some sort of a kick. In Eastern world, the Eastern philosophy, they call it Sat Chit Anand. That happens when this chakra opens up, the unfolding of the Sahasradal Kamal. And the bliss that descends is unparalleled and there is no contradiction to that bliss. Nevertheless, it is still, this level of consciousness is still a toy in the hands of a yogi. One has to explore further as a scientist and as a meditator, more so by a meditator, to see what is behind this consciousness. What is it that supports this consciousness? What is it that supports this potential? And when we dive very deep in meditation, only inkling that comes within is that, there are layers and layers and layers of consciousness, and then all of a sudden you find there is nothing. But as you were saying earlier, this nothing is not just emptiness. It's full of something, but you are not able to express what it is. But the most appropriate one is this, it's a void, full of void. And from this most subtlest, little more increase or lesser subtler and lesser subtler and lesser subtler would manifest. Then the mind comes into the picture. Before that, the consciousness will come. Consciousness triggers your intellect, my identity, my thinking, my feelings, and of course, then the whole system that is being supported by the entire this physical mechanism that we have. So the actual that spoke of the will is that void. Is that void. And through that void, everyone is connected. And that's why they say it's a cosmic consciousness, something that happens, it can echo anywhere. Something that happened 1,000 years back, a person of caliber can tap into it and find out what exactly happened there too. If needed though. Nature doesn't open up just like that, but at times it can happen when you need it. I'll give you a small example. It was in 2002 or so. I was practicing as a pharmacist, and my passion then was to open as many drugstores in New York City as possible. Right? And I found that the best locations would be in front of a hospital. So I would go around with my manager trying to, find the retail spot. Once we found something in Brooklyn, exactly in front of the hospital. And that was a grocery store. So I told grocery store, would you like to get out? How much do you make money anyhow? I'll give you the profit of your next 3 years. I would like to give me the lease. I said, you'll be happy to do it. Those days I used to smoke. So I took my Marlboro and went to the restroom. I wanted to ease myself. I couldn't even unzip myself. The moment I tried to do it, I felt some dark, heavy force um, somehow trying to take over me. And I felt extremely uncomfortable. So I simply walked out of that restroom. It was all the way in the back of the grocery store. So on my way back home, I asked the manager, try and find out why is he so readily agreeing to sell the location? So he found out, my manager, that just 2 weeks back, there was a holdup at that location. The manager of that store was taken to that restroom and he was shot there. You see? And that soul, that life force was still there, seeking help. And I could feel that then. I could feel that heavy force, that dark force descending into me, made me so uncomfortable. Then later on that night, I prayed and prayed and prayed so that there may be some lighter atmosphere there, and that soul who was craving for some help, I prayed that may God help such a soul. So I think certain memories can remain in the form of vibrations at some locations. They're always there anyway, not only just certain memories. Everything's are recorded in the atmosphere.
Yeah. Well, that's so powerful. And, I think being open to the reality of these ways that energy manifests in our lives through the chakras, through our relationships, through the idea of the soul. I think many folks, including my dear friend John O'Donohue, would say, the reality of the invisible is something we need to embrace from this mystical point of view, a term he would always use. But I think we can see that from a scientific point of view, if experience is energy flow, then feeling into the embodied aspect of that flow, and even the relational aspect of the flow, where what we see with our eyes is very limited. So we have to be open to how these emergent properties of energy, for example, manifesting as soul and spirit, can be felt by some individuals. Others may say, oh, that doesn't exist. But I think the journey that you're describing in spiritual anatomy invites us to really say, let's really be open to learning the art and science of these energy patterns inside the body. Let's see that they're related to our larger relational world. And spiritual health, which you so beautifully articulate, Daaji, thank you, is something we can all work on together. So, I like to think that these meetings, this is the first time you and I have ever met each other, are kind of these energy flows where I hope what has emerged in a synergetic way from our conversation for anyone listening will be of benefit to your individual lives, to their ways of bringing this spiritual health into the world. And I look forward to a future time in Newtonian chronological time when the infinite that I think we've talked about today can be shared in the future. So, Daaji, thank you so much for our time together. And I really deeply am honored to be able to be here with you today.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Thank you. I'm grateful for this discussion. And let's do some research together, because I would love to. We have children who can do really amazing, amazing things when we talk of intuition. But the science, though can understand the cognitive part of the brain, the location of that cognitive part in the brain is known. The centers for auditory nerves ending and visuals and optical nerve, all these are well known. But science has still yet to find out how the intuition emerges, which is the center of intuition in the brain. We
Yeah,
can discuss this when you have time, and I think I have a strategy, and we can wind up this experiment in less than 6 months and tell it to the world that this is the center for intuition in the brain. So
great. Well,
I'm
we may
looking forward
find
to
as we
that.
look for that, that the emergent aspect of it sees that there's some way where maybe having certain areas of the brain involved, and we can keep an open mind for this, that it has a quality of emergence, meaning if we try to just pick one little area, we'll miss the whole. And so looking for the synergy will be a fun thing to do together. I would love to do that.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks.
Thank you.